We need to address the situation over there by the river. It's becoming a safety concern.
I'll take a look at it right away.
When I rebuilt my grandfather's old cabin deep in the woods, just beyond the reach of the HOA's control, I thought I was finally free. No board meetings, no fines for paint colors. Just peace, memories, and the sound of the river he used to fish in. But that peace shattered the day a woman named Karen showed up. Clutching a clipboard and claiming I owed dues dating all the way back to 1965, before I was even born. She said the land technically still fell under her authority. Now, I'm trapped in a battle over something that shouldn't even exist. How far will she go to make me pay for a past that isn't mine? When my grandfather passed away, he left behind more than a few old tools and faded photographs. He left behind a piece of peace itself. His cabin sat on the edge of Pine Hollow, a once rural area now swallowed by manicured lawns, HOA bylaws, and people who seemed to think property lines defined morality. The cabin had been untouched for decades, buried under ivy and memories, far enough from the gated community that most residents didn't even know it existed. To me, it wasn't just an old building. It was a connection to something honest, the kind of life where you fixed what was broken and left others to do the same. After years of saving, I decided to rebuild it. Weekends were spent clearing brush, restoring the foundation, and salvaging what was left of the original beams. The neighbors in the HOA a mile down the road watched from afar with polite curiosity at first. Their streets gleamed with sameness. Identical mailboxes, matching shutters, and lawns, so trimmed they looked artificial. My project, with its weathered wood and rustic charm, didn't fit that world. And maybe that's why I loved it so much. For months, the rebuild went quietly. The forest surrounding the cabin muffled the noise of saws and hammers, and each evening I'd sit on the unfinished porch, watching the sun disappear through the trees. It felt like reclaiming a piece of freedom that had been paved over long ago. I wasn't trying to make a statement, just to honor the man who built something with his hands and heart. But in a place like Pine Hollow, peace doesn't last long. One afternoon, as I was loading lumber from my truck, I noticed a pair of cars I didn't recognize parked near the old access road. A few people stood there, clipboards in hand, scanning the property as if inspecting something they owned. They were from the Pine Hollow HOA, a group I had nothing to do with, a group that technically had no authority here. Yet, the way they looked at me, it was as if they were already measuring the fine they'd write. That was the first time I saw her, Karen, perfectly pressed blazer, a permanent squint of disapproval, and a voice that carried authority she hadn't earned. She didn't introduce herself that day, just snapped a few pictures of the cabin and drove off. I figured it was harmless curiosity. I couldn't have been more wrong. In the weeks that followed, small things started happening. Notices appeared in my mailbox addressed to property owner. Pine Hollow, warnings about unauthorized construction. Letter stating I needed HOA approval for any structural modification, each one more absurd than the last, considering my land wasn't even part of the HOA map. Still, I ignored it. The cabin was nearly complete, and I wasn't about to let bureaucratic nonsense ruin what I'd worked for. But deep down, something told me this wasn't over. The tone of those letters, the precision of the dates, the way my mailbox seemed to be targeted, it all hinted at something bigger. Something brewing behind those white fences. Karen hadn't come to welcome me. She'd come to claim something. And soon, I'd learn just how far she was willing to go to make sure I followed rules that were never mine to begin with. At first, I tried to laugh it off. The letters from the HOA felt like a bad joke, a mistake that would sort itself out once someone realized my property wasn't under their control. But then, the tone changed. What began as friendly reminders turned into threats of legal action. The envelopes grew thicker, the wording sharper. Failure to comply may result in additional penalties. Outstanding dues must be paid in full. I called the HOA office, not that I owed them that courtesy. A receptionist told me in a rehearsed tone that all properties within the historical Pine Hollow boundary fall under HOA oversight. Historical boundary. I decided to fight back, but I wanted to do it right. I spent nights digging through county records, old maps, land deeds, and zoning documents. I found what I needed in a dusty file buried in the local archives. Proof that my grandfather's land was never annexed by the HOA. The boundary line ended a full half-mile before my cabin's property began. The paper was old, faded, and stamped with a date that would make any lawyer smile. I thought that would be the end of it. But when I showed up at the HOA office to present my findings, Karen didn't even look at the document. She stood behind her desk, arms crossed, eyes cold, and said, "That might have been true once. But things change. This community has evolved." She spoke like a politician, every word coated with smug authority. I asked her to show me the updated boundary maps. She smiled and said, "You can submit a request in writing." Then she handed me a form that looked deliberately complicated, pages of fine print designed to discourage questions. Over the next few weeks, the situation escalated. Karen began sending inspectors to my property, men with cameras and clipboards who'd walk around uninvited, jotting notes as if cataloging violations. I confronted one of them, but he only said, "We're authorized by the HOA." When I asked for documentation, he left without a word. Then came the fines. Thousands of dollars in unpaid assessments, structure, non-compliance, and unauthorized modifications. They even tried to charge me for common area maintenance, which was absurd. The nearest common area was 2 miles away. Each envelope was a new attempt to break me down, and each one only made me more determined. I filed a complaint with the County Property Board, attaching copies of every false notice, photo, and dated map. The clerk there raised an eyebrow when she saw the stack. "This happens more than you think," she said. "Some HOAs just assume they can claim land that isn't theirs." It gave me hope until the county told me it could take months to investigate. Karen didn't need months. She needed pressure, and she applied it relentlessly. One morning, I woke up to find my access road blocked, a chain and padlock wrapped around the gate I'd built. A sign hung from it, "Restricted access, HOA violation." It wasn't legally enforceable, but it was enough to make deliveries stop and visitors turn around. I had to cut the chain myself just to get out. When I did, I found a note tucked inside a plastic sleeve under the sign. "Further interference will be reported." No signature, but I didn't need one. Karen was escalating from bureaucracy to intimidation. I tried talking to my neighbors again, hoping someone might speak up, but they avoided me more than ever. One older resident finally admitted the truth. Karen was using HOA funds to threaten legal action against anyone who aided non-compliant properties. Fear had turned the neighborhood silent. That night, sitting by the newly rebuilt fireplace, I thought about my grandfather. He built this cabin with nothing but hand tools and grit. He didn't believe in bending to authority. He believed in ownership, in the right to call something yours without permission. I decided then, I wasn't going to let Karen erase that legacy. So, I took the fight public. I wrote a detailed post online explaining everything: the boundary lines, the fake dues, the harassment. I attached every document I had and shared photos of the property. I didn't name names at first, but locals didn't need much to connect the dots. The story spread fast. People started sharing their own run-ins with Karen and the HOA. Turns out, I wasn't the first person she'd targeted, just the first who pushed back. Within days, the HOA's Facebook page was flooded with angry comments. Karen tried to control the narrative, posting statements about misunderstandings and miscommunication. But it was too late. Her carefully built image of authority was cracking. That's when things turned personal. I came home one evening to find my mailbox ripped off its post. My security cameras both disconnected. The footage I'd saved was gone. It wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about power, and she wasn't used to losing it. A week later, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing the HOA. They were filing a lawsuit claiming I owed 60 years of unpaid dues. The number was laughable, but the letter was real. They were betting I'd fold under legal pressure. They didn't realize I had proof that would dismantle their entire case. I gathered every document, every letter, every time-stamped photo. I filed my own claim, a counteraction alleging harassment, trespassing, and defamation. The county clerk looked almost relieved when she processed it. "About time someone stood up to them," she said. But before the court date arrived, Karen made one last move. Early one morning, I woke to the sound of an engine outside. A tow truck sat at the end of my drive, hauling away a trailer full of my building materials. When I ran out to stop them, the driver handed me a copy of a property seizure order signed by the HOA, not a court, not the county. Just the HOA. It had no legal weight, but they were counting on intimidation, not legitimacy. I filmed everything: the tow truck, the fake order, the damage left behind. I uploaded it all online. And that's when things exploded. The video went viral locally, shared across town forums and community groups. People began showing up to my property, not to trespass, but to help. Some brought food, others offered tools or advice. The same neighbors who once avoided me now stood beside me. For the first time, Karen's power started to crack publicly. Her control wasn't built on rules, it was built on fear. And now, people weren't afraid anymore. But I knew she wouldn't go quietly. There was still a court hearing ahead, and Karen had too much pride to let this end without a fight. I could feel it, the calm before the storm. Everything she'd done so far was just her warming up. The real battle was still coming. And when it did, the truth about the HOA, the land, and my grandfather's cabin would finally come out in a way none of them could bury again. The morning of the hearing felt unreal. Months of chaos, threats, and sleepless nights had all led to this: a small county courtroom packed with people who, for once, weren't afraid to see what really happened. Word had spread across Pine Hollow. Neighbors who'd once crossed the street to avoid me now filled the benches, whispering, waiting. Some came out of curiosity. Others, I think, came to see Karen finally held accountable. She arrived late, as if to make an entrance. Her hair perfectly curled, her blazer pressed, her expression carved into that same smug half-smile I'd come to know too well. Behind her, 2 HOA board members followed like shadows, silent, obedient, and terrified. She didn't look at me, didn't have to. Her presence screamed confidence. She thought this was a formality, that I'd be crushed under paperwork and technicalities like so many before me. But I wasn't walking in unprepared. I'd spent nights building a case she couldn't wriggle out of. I had copies of county zoning maps, the original 1965 deed. Every notice, every violation slip, every fake invoice. And most importantly, the video. The one of her seizure order, the tow truck, and her signature on a document with no legal authority. The judge, a calm woman with steel gray hair and a voice that cut through the room, called us to order. The HOA's attorney spoke first. Reading off a laundry list of supposed violations and unpaid dues, he said the cabin was subject to historical via maintenance obligations, that I had benefited from the HOA's community, infrastructure, and that decades of unpaid assessments had accumulated interest. The numbers were outrageous, hundreds of thousands of dollars. When it was my turn to respond, I didn't waste time on emotion. I slid the county deed across the table. The judge examined it, her brow furrowing, This property lies outside the Pine Hollow HOA jurisdiction, she read aloud. The attorney tried to interject, but she raised her hand. Sit down, she said firmly. I then played the video. Karen's fake order. The tow truck? Her voice, clear as day, saying, I'm authorized by the HOA to seize these materials. The judge paused the clip and stared directly at her. Is that your signature? Karen hesitated. For the first time, I saw it, the crack in her armor. Her face stiffened, the confidence draining as the silence stretched. The entire room waited. That's standard procedure, she stammered. We were ensuring compliance with what? The judge interrupted sharply. You had no jurisdiction. You trespassed on private property. You authorized seizure without legal standing. Her tone hardened. Do you understand how serious that is? Karen's attorney shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The judge turned to me. Do you have documentation of your complaints to the HOA and county? I nodded, sliding over the thick binder I'd kept every letter, every time-stamped email. She flipped through it silently. Then, in a moment that felt like slow motion, the judge closed the binder and leaned back. Mr. Reed, she said, using my last name with a tone of finality. Your grandfather's property is not, and has never been, under HOA authority. Later that evening, the county announced a formal audit of the Pine Hollow. HOA. The local news ran the story with a headline that made me laugh for the first time in months. Homeowner proves HOA has no jurisdiction, chairwoman under investigation. But just when I thought the nightmare was over, a letter arrived. No envelope this time, just a folded sheet of paper slipped under my cabin door. The handwriting was familiar. You think you've won, it read. But you have no idea what's coming. For a moment, I froze. The woods outside were quiet, too quiet. I stepped out onto the porch, scanning the tree line. Nothing but shadows. But I knew. She wasn't done, not yet. The next morning, I drove into town to meet with the county clerk about securing the property records. When I arrived, she handed me a manila folder. Inside was a scanned copy of a transfer request filed weeks earlier. Karen had tried to redraw the boundary map before the hearing. If she'd succeeded, my land would have fallen under HOA control retroactively. That was the breaking point for me. Not anger, not fear, but resolve. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been cornered by someone like her. Told to follow rules that didn't make sense, punished for daring to stand alone. I decided to make everything public. All the documents, the fake maps, the video, everything. I uploaded them to a public archive and linked it in a final post. The truth doesn't need to hide behind gates, I wrote. Asterisk, asterisk, the story spread beyond Pine Hollow. People across the state shared it, calling it a symbol of resistance against HOA abuse. Lawyers reached out, offering help. Even state representatives commented, promising to review how far HOA authority could really go. Karen vanished from the public eye after that. The HOA board quietly removed her pending investigation. But rumors said she'd tried to start another community association, under a new name in a nearby county, though no one would sign up. Her reputation was gone, her power dismantled by the very rules she'd twisted. I returned to the cabin one last time that week. The leaves had started to turn, the woods glowing gold under the fading sun. For the first time in years, it felt like my grandfather's spirit was at peace here again. The porch creaked beneath my feet as I looked out over the land that no one could ever claim again. Still, I couldn't shake the thought of that letter. Those words, "You think you've won." Was it a threat? A warning? Or just the last gasp of someone who couldn't accept defeat? As I locked the door and turned out the light, one thing was certain: the battle for this cabin had ended. But the war against people like her, That was only just beginning. In the weeks following the court hearing, it felt as though Pine Hollow had exhaled for the first time in years. The air was lighter. The tension that had once hung over the community, invisible but suffocating, began to fade. For so long, Karen's voice had echoed through every HOA meeting, every letter, every whispered warning. But now, that voice was gone, and people were finally realizing how much power they'd given to fear. The county's investigation into the HOA spread wider than anyone expected. What started as a boundary dispute unraveled years of questionable decisions, unapproved assessments, and misused funds. Dozens of homeowners came forward with their own stories, fines for lawn colors, citations for mailbox height, even threats over unauthorized holiday decorations. For years, Karen had run Pine Hollow like her own private kingdom, enforcing rules that didn't exist in any official charter. The illusion of authority had been her greatest weapon. When the county audit results became public, it was clear she'd crossed more lines than anyone realized. She'd authorized expenditures without board approval, falsified signatures, and pocketed processing fees from homeowners desperate to avoid penalties. The HOA board voted unanimously to dissolve under-county supervision until a new election could be held. Karen herself disappeared for a while. No appearances, no statements, nothing but silence. But her name lingered like a ghost. To some, she was a cautionary tale. To others, a reminder of how easy it was to lose your voice when someone like her convinced you that rules mattered more than reason. As for me, I returned to what I'd set out to do in the first place: rebuild the cabin. Not as a monument to the fight I'd endured, but as a promise that this place would never again be taken from my family. The work felt different now. Every hammer strike carried relief instead of resentment. I replaced the fence that had been spray-painted and rebuilt the porch that had been scuffed by trespassers. Friends and strangers showed up to help, people I'd never met before but who'd followed the story online. They came with tools, coffee, and quiet encouragement. One older man said, "You gave us hope." We've all had our own Karens. Within a month, the cabin was finally finished. A small plaque hung by the front door, carved with my grandfather's initials and the year the original structure had been built. 1965. The same year Karen claimed I started owing dues. I left it there intentionally. Let it be a reminder that history can't be rewritten by authority or arrogance. The county attorney later contacted me with an update. Several charges had been filed against Karen, including fraud, falsification of records, and harassment. She eventually agreed to a plea deal that required restitution and a public apology to affected homeowners. When the statement was released, it was short and emotionless, but it didn't matter. The damage to her reputation was permanent. More importantly, her downfall sparked something bigger. Pine Hollow's residents began questioning the entire HOA system. They attended town meetings, demanded transparency, and proposed new limits on how much power associations could exert over private property. What had started as one man's fight over an old cabin became the catalyst for reform across the county. A few months later, a journalist reached out to do a follow-up feature on the story. The article went viral again. The headline read, "Man Rebuilds Family Cabin, Exposes HOA Corruption Decades in the Making." It wasn't just about me. It was about what happens when ordinary people stop accepting because we said so as an answer. I didn't do interviews after that. The story had taken on a life of its own, and I didn't want to become a symbol. I just wanted peace, the kind my grandfather built this place for in the first place. One late autumn evening, as the leaves turned red and gold, I sat on the cabin's porch with a cup of coffee and the sound of the river nearby. The chaos of the last year felt distant, like a storm that had finally passed. Yet, in that calm, I found clarity. Karen hadn't just tried to take my land. She'd tried to take my sense of belonging. to rewrite the story of what this place meant. And in fighting back, I'd reclaimed more than property. I'd reclaimed legacy. I still remember the night the first snow fell after everything ended. The world outside was quiet, blanketed in white. And for the first time in years, there were no headlights creeping down the dirt road. No envelopes waiting in the mailbox. No shadows lurking by the fence. Just stillness. Just peace. But life has a strange way of reminding you that even after a victory, scars remain. One day, while organizing my grandfather's old papers, I found a faded envelope hidden at the bottom of a trunk. Inside was a letter written in his handwriting, dated decades ago. It read, "If you're reading this, it means the cabin is yours now. Don't ever let anyone tell you what this place is worth. Not in money, not in rules. It's worth the quiet, the work, the memories. Protect it, because peace doesn't come easy." I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands, realizing that somehow he'd known. Maybe not the details, but the principle that sooner or later someone would try to claim what didn't belong to them. And he was right. Peace doesn't come easy, but it's worth fighting for. Months later, when spring returned, the new Pine Hollow HOA, rebuilt under county supervision, sent out a letter of its own. This time, it wasn't a threat or a fine. It was an apology. They invited me to attend a community meeting as a respected member of the local history and a reminder of accountability. I didn't go. I didn't need their validation. But I appreciated the gesture. From what I've heard, the community changed for the better. Rules were simplified, dues were lowered, and for the first time, residents actually had a say. The gates of Pine Hollow, once a symbol of exclusion, were opened permanently during daylight hours. Kids could ride bikes down the main road without being stopped. People started talking again, laughing again. Every once in a while, I drive past the entrance, the same one where Karen once stood with her clipboard and false authority, and I can't help but smile. The sign now reads simply, "Pine Hollow, a place to call home." Back at the cabin, I planted a small garden in front of the porch. Wildflowers, just like the ones that grew there when my grandfather first built it. I visit often, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. The quiet is different now. It's no longer haunted by the echoes of conflict, but grounded in peace earned the hard way. The story may have ended, but its impact still ripples. Every few months, I get letters from people across the country, homeowners who faced similar battles. Small-town residents standing up to overreaching HOAs. They say my story gave them courage to fight back, to ask questions, to demand proof instead of blind compliance. Some even send photos of their homes, the gardens they were once told to remove, the fences they rebuilt, the colors they refused to repaint. It's humbling to think a fight that started over one cabin could inspire so many. And yet, sometimes, late at night, I still think about that letter slipped under my door. You think you've won? Maybe it wasn't a threat. Maybe it was an admission. Because, in the end, winning wasn't about humiliating Karen or tearing down an HOA. It was about standing up for something simple: the right to live without fear of control. Before the final hearing, I used to feel angry every time I drove past the HOA sign. Now, I just feel grateful. Grateful that I stood my ground. Grateful that truth still matters. And grateful that a small wooden cabin in the woods reminded a whole community what freedom really means. The cabin stands stronger now than ever before. Its foundation rebuilt, its story retold. It's not just a building. It's proof that some battles are worth fighting, not for power, but for peace. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes, the walls we rebuild aren't to keep others out. They're to protect the things that truly matter inside. Because when someone tries to take what's yours, not with force, but with rules and paperwork, the quietest, strongest thing you can do is simply refuse to let go.